just been connected to the largest spiritual network on the planet, The Jeffrey Daugherty Show.
Jeffrey Daugherty.
Sink or swim, deep end information, parabiblical research, spiritual technologies, personal empowerment. Be your own guru. Guide your own spirit. Master your own ascension. And now, showing you how, here's Jeffrey Daugherty.
Well, hello, folks. This is Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, back for another week of programs. And I have what I think is a special treat for you this weekend. I was interviewed on Friday night, I believe it was, or Thursday night. I can't really remember. On the Unknown Origins radio program over the Dark Matter radio network. And I'm going to rebroadcast that interview in full, and I'm going to do it for a few reasons, because it's just perfect to bring at this time, because the interview was very adept at covering where we've been, where we are, and where we are going as a show, and where NCK, or New Cosmic Knowledge, is going as a service to you. So it's a great interview. It talks about who I am, where I've been, what I believe. It talks about many of the things I've been doing, many of the things I am doing, and it also talks about many of the things I'm going to be doing. So I think this is going to give you a deeper and more fuller understanding of who I am, a deeper and more fuller understanding of what we are and what we're doing, and equally as important, a deeper and more fuller understanding of where we're going. And I really think you're going to be entertained, because this is probably one of the most wide-ranging, you might say hard-hitting, and just outright entertaining broadcasts I've ever heard. It's definitely one of the better interviews, maybe the best interview that I've ever been in or on or a part of. And it's just fun, it's exciting, it's enlightening, and it's a great way to, again, talk about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. Without any further ado, I'm going to go now into the interview on Unknown Origins Radio, already in progress.
Mark, we are calling our guest, Jeffrey Daugherty, and I believe he's there. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Hello, Mark. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Sorry it took so long to get back to you, but Skype has really not been our friend tonight. So, I think who do we complain to? Is it Microsoft or the Danish? Who owns this?
It's worth.
I'm not sure if Zuckerberg doesn't own it yet. It's probably just a matter of time.
No, we need to make our own. That's what I think. That's when the big boys start doing it bad, it's the little guys who come up with the alternative methods. That's what we need to do. So, Jeff, anyway, welcome.
Our apologies to you, Jeff, and also to Keith and the listeners, but hopefully we got that ironed out.
Yes.
No worries.
Okay, well, Jeff, as I just introduced you as we were bringing you on, and we're mentioning that, we're going to talk with you tonight. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I read this on your website, and, we had such a great time talking with you last time about your book, Apostle Paul Antichrist. And the you have a unique perspective in a lot of different areas with the religious history, mainstream religion, and we've kind of covered that on our last few shows. We've kind of got into a theme there for a while, and I wanted to shake it up a little bit. You talked about a form of meditation, and I think, if you don't mind, I think I'd like to ask you if you could just explain that for us, how you came about this meditation technique, and how it started to produce these results that you were talking about on your website.
Well, it's actually a story that's probably close to 20 years in the making. It really had its genesis way back when I was still a evangelist in the Assemblies of God Church and a couple other Pentecostal organizations. And back in that time, this was just at the very beginning of when this whole thing was starting that they used to call, they called it prophecy. It really wasn't prophecy, but the gist of it was, and you've probably seen it on TV now because it's become very, very popular, but the preacher's up there preaching, and he'll pick a person out of the audience and start telling them that, your husband left you, you've got cancer, you're having a problem with this in your life, you have a problem with that in your life. And we called that working in prophecy. It's not really prophecy, and I never really dealt with that very much. I never did much of that. But then towards the last couple of years, when I was working as an evangelist, up there doing the regular preaching thing, and I would suddenly started seeing people, a person in the audience, I would see them, and when I would see them, it was almost as if time would stop for a moment, and I would see like a movie of something that had taken place, was taking place, would take place within their life, and that was kind of the genesis of it. It's something that I didn't sit down and try to learn. It's something that I didn't really sit down and think about. It's just something that began to happen, and that consistently happened from that time forward. And then I picked up something somewhere, this technique called quantum jumping. Maybe you've heard of it, or some in your audience have. And basically the premise of quantum jumping is that there's an infinite number of universes that are all more or less parallel. And because there's an infinite number of universes, there's an infinite number of you out there, different versions of you. And the logic goes that if you need help in figuring out your finances, there's probably a you in some other universe that is a financial whiz. So you do a meditation technique and you go and actually visit your doppelganger in the other universe. And I began to use that to great success. And of course, you immediately begin to ask yourself, are you really going to another universe? Are you just accessing recessed parts and resources of your own mind, and it's in a visualization type state? I don't usually get too caught up in having to explain everything. If it works, that's good enough for me. If a spiritual technology is effective, that's good enough for me, as long as I know it's not coming from nefarious places. And then this, brought us up to about 2 or 3 years ago, where I started writing the book, Apostle Paul Antichrist, doing hours and hours and hours of study. I mean, George Norrie said it was over 20 years of biblical study, and he probably wasn't exaggerating. And I began to start to see those snippets again, only it wasn't of any person, it was of the people that I was writing about and studying about. And when it started happening, I started deciding to, let's see if we can give more attention to this and refine it. So instead of getting a flash of Yahushua or Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount, why not see if I can train myself to be able to get there and see the whole thing? Now, from then till now, I've been able to improve my ability to tune into that wavelength for extended times. Now, I'm not real sure even in my mind today what's the difference between remote viewing and time traveling. To me, it seems like just in my own head that it's remote viewing, because I can see a event that happened. I can, in limited ways, see events that are going to happen, but I do not have any ability to interact. It's not like the folks that you hear, on Coast to Coast, and that Art Bell used to talk to all the time, that were calling him from the future, that were able to get in some type of device and go back to the past. I wasn't, and have not to this point been able to interact, just to observe. And I don't know if it's because I'm still learning, or if it's a lack of ability, or just a reality of the phenomenon. I tend to see it in layers. I'll be able to focus on the audio, if you will. Then I can focus on the visual, if you will. Then I can focus on the kinesthetics. What's the feel? How's it happening? But never have I felt like any of the people, places, or things in the place that I'm viewing / visiting, whatever it is, have ever taken notice of my presence, and nor have I ever been able to in any way affect that scenario, just simply to observe and record, be it past or be it future. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of where I am today, and that's the genesis to revelation of it.
Okay, let me, if I may, jump in. I've got a whole range of follow-ups with you. Now, clearly, we can all agree, as I'm sure the listeners their heads are exploding, because what you've just elaborated of this scenario is so mind-boggling and earth-changing in its consequences that we would be remiss if we didn't ask some of the tough questions to go along with it, and I'm sure you've heard these before. But
absolutely, and just on one note on that,
sure.
I think that as we continue to move forward in our study and in our progression and in what I view as our ascension, what today on, I can't even remember the date, I'm terrible with dates, July 24th or whatever it is.
Right.
What is supernatural today on July 24th will be much closer to natural July 24th, 5 years from now. I think we're on an accelerated curve of spiritual and psychic understanding, and what now is mind-blowing is going to be rather pedestrian 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So I think we're all moving, and I think we're going to be moving at an accelerated pace. So this is good. It gets us in the right mind frame.
Well, I know from a technological standpoint, the human race, Western society especially, has advanced dramatically in the last 5-10 years from all of our gadgets now, which, hey, my cell phone I'm holding in my hand right now is more complicated than Captain Kirk's communicator on Star Trek.
Absolutely.
But, that's the whole thing. This is something I'm interested in seeing is, okay, technologically we're advancing at an enormous rate. Are we advancing on a spiritual rate, on a metaphysical rate? We as spiritual beings, which I always believe, that's my personal opinion, we're spiritual beings wearing meat suits. But where do we go in that development other than just the technological? We have our toys that we play with, but right now, where else can we go as a species?
Well, if I may, before you answer that, I think we need to really start at the beginning with this, with all due respect, Mark, before we get into that area. And that is, we need to have, and I'm not even sure I can frame the questions appropriately because I haven't had a whole lot of chance to think about how they could be fairly framed. But let's go to the very... Just
hit me with them. I have no ego to bruise, and it's impossible to offend me. We're all friends here. Let's just... be straight and forward.
Well, I think we just tolerate Bruce, but, between you and me.
Well, I'm just visiting this planet, so that's quite all right with me.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Here's the first question. Is there a way, from what you've been able to experience and what you've been able to document, is there a way to corroborate what you've seen, to verify it, to provide to the most skeptical layperson, look, here's a case study. I saw this, I verified this, and this is the proof positive. Because quite honestly, if you were to come up with that kind of evidence that could be corroborated, verified by any standard, illegal standard or whatever, it would be pretty hard to refute that. And if you have a number of instances that you could lay in front of someone as evidence and say, look, here's what I did, here's what I observed, here's what I corroborate, here's the testimony of somebody who can verify what I said. Is there a mechanism by which what you're doing can be brought into standard evaluation that way? Because I don't, if you can do that, then it's pretty hard, unless you're completely brain dead, to argue that it's not a valid scenario, that you're, not valid evidence. Let you respond to that.
Sure, and that's an excellent question. I found myself very much in the same place that you are, at least in framing this question, because I was having, all of these experiences, but they weren't experiences that can be quantified. And I didn't know particularly what was happening, and I was, not very excited to share this information with a lot of people. And one day, my son and I, somehow it came up in conversation what I was doing, and he said, "Oh, that's simple. You're time traveling." And it kind of hit me like a bolt out of the blue. Time traveling? That's who time travels? But I said to myself, okay, if I'm time traveling, and this was in reference to going back in the past and being able to create these incredibly detailed and picturesque word pictures of things that had happened in the past. And I took the same frame of mind that you're espousing here. I said, if I can go backward in time and see events, see things, then it would stand to reason that I should be able to go forward in time and do the same thing. Now, I was trying to think to myself, what could I do that I could actually measure and document? And of course, this probably isn't acceptable to everybody, and some people, nothing will be acceptable to them, but it was NFL season. I'm not a huge football fan. And, I've never placed any bets as far as the NFL goes. So what I did, it was week 4 of the NFL season, and I said to my son, it was my son and 2 other people, I don't want to name them here tonight, we'll change the names to protect the innocent, but we had my son and 2 other people. What I did is started picking the scores of the National Football League games versus the point spread. And if you don't know what that means, let's say Tampa Bay is playing Miami, and Miami is supposed to win the game by 3 points. So that means if Tampa Bay loses by anything, 3 or less, then if you bet on Tampa Bay, you win. So it's called the point spread. And I started picking games according to the point spread. I started in week number 4 of last NFL season. I went all the way through the Super Bowl. And what I would do is do this technique that I'm still working on. I would see the scores of the games on a television set, and then I would record the score, match it up to the point spread, and I would give this to my son, and I'd give this to the 2 other people. And what the bottom line was, after the week 4 through the Super Bowl, I had predicted accurately against the point spread with 78% accuracy. And to put that in perspective, one of my friends is not a professional gambler, but he spends hundreds, if not thousands of dollars every month gambling on football, college football, pro football. I didn't study any statistics. I didn't study any, injury reports. I didn't even watch the games. I did nothing except see the scores and pick them. And and I ended up picking about 300 games was the total. And he said to me, if you had 1,000 games picked and we're still at 78%, you would be by far the most successful handicapper of all time. No one even hits, if you hit 50%, you can make a boatload of money. So last year, week 4, all the way through the Super Bowl, 78% accuracy against the point spread in the National Football League. And to me, and I'm not trying to prove this to anyone, I'm not trying to sell this to anyone, I don't really care if anyone believes me or not, but to me, that at 78%, that was pretty convincing proof to me that whether I'm time traveling, whether I'm remote viewing, whether I'm accessing heretofore unaccessed areas of my mind or the universal consciousness, whatever I'm doing, it's genuine and it's remarkably effective.
Let me say this, and I'm Mark, and then I want to follow up with yours. What you just told us, in my mind, is the most mind-blowing evidence, and I'm going to make you an offer. I know that you're not in it for the money, but I would like to offer to you to do a documented, ironclad test. It doesn't have to be football, or it doesn't have to be sports. It can be anything you would like that could be overseen by an objective third party, documented. In other words, your prognostications locked in a safe deposit box that, to go through whatever mechanism is necessary to verify that. Because I'm going to make an assumption. You are very interested, as I well know, and we all know, that you want to get the message out. Secondly, you want people to believe it because it's true. That is, so if we could present this evidence in an ironclad fashion that could not be assailed, then I think you have a tiger by the tail here in all the best, definitions of the term. And I would be willing to work with you on developing a program that meets anybody's criteria, the legal system, the scientific community, the general public's common sense, to say, all right, if you don't think this is true, we're going to do this in a controlled environment. And I can prove to you that's, and I know for a fact, I know, having worked with some sports, I worked in broadcast network sports, that number is astronomically high. So,
what is a normal number of these guys that we see on TV or, read about in the paper, Danny, whatever, Sheridan or whatever?
30 to 30, 1/3 to half.
1/3 to half. Okay.
And I may be wrong. I would welcome the listening audience to correct me on that, but nowhere near that. There are so many variables in that, and of course, you could hit a game here and a game there. But I have a friend that I'll be meeting with early tomorrow morning, who was with fantasy football. The guy's one of the best in the world on that, and I'm going to ask him what the numbers were. But 78%, I think, is just mind-blowing. Now, quite honestly, if you wanted to promote what you're capable of doing, you're not breaking any laws by having this capability. I go parlay that into a little money to invest in getting the word out. But I think the key is to get skeptical people, because this is a world full of...
Hello, Bruce, you there? Is Jeff?
And we're back.
Yes. Well, Jeff, would you consider that? Let's get right back to the meat and potatoes here. Would you consider working in a very controlled environment with to say, hey, okay, here's the deal. Let's do it. See if I'm telling the truth. Let's get some third-party observers, whether they're at the university or anyone of credibility, and say, okay, now I proved it. Now are you going to believe me? Because I'll tell you what, that takes that whole skepticism issue right off the table. It's just an idea, and you don't have to answer it now. You can think about it. But let's get on to Mark's question, and that
let me answer that if you don't mind.
Oh, not at all. I just didn't want to force an answer out of you on the air. That's all.
Of course, football season is coming back up on us again, and I thought about trying to do it with the other sports, but I know nothing about this, and betting on things like baseball and hockey and the NBA, it's not as cut and dry as, a point spread in the NFL or in college football. So my idea was, again, to start it again, but to, move beyond, the people that are, that know me, that, if I lied, they'd swear to it, and actually get what you're talking about, some people that are, objective and can actually verify. But my concern, frankly, is that, it'll be seen as some type of a parlor trick, and I really don't have any interest in, being the guy that, predicts the future or picks the, the NFL scores. What I really started this for was, writing the book Apostle Paul Antichrist and trying to show people that, in my view, the collapse of big-time religion is opening up the door for true spirituality. So that would be my only hesitation, is it being turned into a parlor trick and being turned into a one pony circus. So, but it's definitely something that I'm open to, and will definitely, I welcome you contacting me, and let's see what we could do to at least verify that this technique is viable objectively.
And I fully respect that, and I'm sure Mark does, and as do the listeners. It could be, I I don't know if it's feasible. You know what you're capable of. If it's predicting the weather or something that's more not, less a human vice related issue and gambling, that might be more palatable across the board. Anyway, let's talk about the spiritual aspect, because that's the end game from your agenda, and that's something I want to look into. And you made a very interesting point here, that if I may paraphrase, your goal is to highlight the fact that we are moving away from the human institution, you will, of organized religion and more into the spiritual world, which is hopefully at the basis of, you would think, at organized religion. And you being a former minister, a pastor, speak to that, because I think that's, like it or not, if you just look at the mainstream press and media in the religious world, attendance in virtually every major religion, at least in the United States, is dropping, not increasing. And that's a trend that doesn't show any signs of reversing. So could you just discuss Mark's earlier question, what about the spiritual aspects of this, and where do you see the end game coming to? And I'd like to let you discuss that at length.
You bet. Now, last year, it was either last year or the year before, Gallup did a poll about asking people to self-identify their religious preferences. And for the first time ever, a majority of people under the age of 30, over 50% of people identified themselves as atheists. When I was on Coast to Coast, George Norrie quoted I believe it was a Harvard study that showed that people that self-identified themselves as non-churched had nearly quadrupled over the past 20 years. And the Roman Catholic Church is in a bit of a quandary over declining priests and declining nuns, the numbers of them. And everywhere you look, you read another statistic about, I call it big time religion. That's probably a little bit sarcastic. Organized Western religion is, by every measurable number, in decline, as you correctly stated. And that's rather historic, because for the last 2,000 years, at least in the West, we have been dominated by Christianity in its Roman Catholic and its Protestant forms. You've got conservatively 1 billion Catholics. If you cobble together all of the Protestants, you've probably got another billion. So you've got 2 billion people, predominantly in the West, that are Christians, of whether they identify themselves as Presbyterian, Pentecostal, or followers of the Pope. They're Christians. And for 2,000 years, you really didn't have a lot of choice. It was the Catholic Church, or it was nothing. It was pretty much, as far as the religion that was tied to Christ was concerned, it was Catholicism. And that worked very well from, AD 30s when it started up until about 1960s, 70s area, because the ability of the average person, the average Joe, the average Jane, to be able to have access to not only the information, of the Bible. I remember when I went to Bible college, when I would really study the Bible, I'd be sitting on my living room floor, and I would have 10 or 12 reference books all piled out in front of me and opened up to pages. And you had to buy all 10 or 12 of them. They weren't giving them away. Now when I study the Bible, I don't even have a paper Bible. I'm on the internet, and I've got tabs open, and it's all free. And, I've been on a couple of debates lately with these guys that call themselves Christian apologists, and, they all have master's degree and doctor's degree, and, my bachelor in theology makes me not a Bible scholar. Well, the truth of the matter is, you don't have to be a Bible scholar. Really, everyone's a Bible scholar. If you know how to use the internet, if you know how to operate a mouse, you can pull up interlinear concordance, which is the Greek New Testament translated into literal English. And you can see exactly what the Greek said. And you can even click on the Greek word, and it'll show you what that root word means. And if you click on the root word, it'll show you where that root word came from. So you can conjugate a Hebrew verb just as well as a master of divinity can do it just by using your computer. That was unheard of even 10 years ago, much less 110 years ago. I mean, you got to remember, for a lot of that 2,000 years, people didn't have access to reading. They weren't able to read. They weren't able to read the Bible. And it was a tightly, the knowledge was held by a tight-knit cabal, the priest and the hierarchy of the church. But as humanity progressed in technology and we progressed in our mental capacities, or regained, some think, our previous mental capacities, we've come to the place now where all of a sudden we're all having these aha moments. We're saying, the media's telling us that even the Pope says, what did he say, at least 5% of his priests are pedophiles? And, I've been a religious leader before. If he's telling us 5, it's probably at least 15. But now the media's telling us these things. And now we can go to the Bible and we can say, but wait a minute, Jesus said this, but Paul says this completely opposite thing. So the ability to control and manage the information is slipping away from the mainstream religion.
He's known as the Christian whistleblower. Once again, here's Jeffrey Daugherty.
Well, I told you, folks, and thank you, Cliff, for that introduction. I told you, folks, it's good stuff, and we haven't even scratched the surface of the surface yet. So you want to be back tomorrow for another edition of the Jeffrey Daugherty Show, and we really get into a lot of stuff tomorrow. We get more into the time travel. We get into demons, UFO'S, spirits. We get into all kinds of stuff that you won't even believe. It's going to be a great show. I think you really enjoyed this show, and I'm asking you, every single one of you that listens to this, to send this to somebody else and get somebody else to listen. We've simply got to get more people listening to these programs, because this message is just too damn important not to get out there. So follow me on Twitter at NC Kabbalah. Like me on Facebook under Jeff A. Daugherty and The Jeffrey Daugherty Show. Like me on Google Plus, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm asking you to do all those things, and I'm asking you to ask the divine what else you can do to help. And Cliff's going to tell you how to get a hold of me on the way out. Until tomorrow, it's Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian whistleblower, wishing you peace and light.
Stay connected with the largest spiritual network on the planet, www.imnck.com. On Facebook, Jeffrey Daugherty and Jeffrey Daugherty Show. And on Twitter at NC Kabbalah. Visit imnck.com today and learn how to create yourself and live the life you'll love.